Taliban say they've taken the major city of Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan. Reuters is citing an Afghan official as saying local authorities had surrendered without a fight. The country's capital, Kabul, remains the only major city under government control. Earlier, the Taliban captured 4 more provincial capitals, including the heavily defended city of Mazar-i-Sharif. It's a major blow to the government, which had promised to defend the country's 4th largest city. Many countries are now scrambling to evacuate their citizens. On Saturday, U.S. President Joe Biden authorized the deployment of roughly 5,000 troops to support the drawdown.
Well, hello and good morning. It's really a momentum for Taliban, and the scenario on the ground is no more about the clashes and offensives. It's about surrendering. Recently, we witnessed in eastern Nangarhar province that the provincial governor was sitting with the Taliban in his palace, and he was talking with them in a peaceful way. And it seems that this is really a surrendering scenario anymore. At the same time, Mehterlam is the neighboring provincial capital, which also fell to the Taliban. At the same time, after Mazar-i-Sharif and north of the country, we get report about eastern parts, Nangarhar, Laghman, and now Nuristan. 2 of its districts fell to the Taliban this morning. In some parts, the clashes are very low, and there is no more any intense fight between the Taliban and Afghanistan government forces. The scenario is changing as we see the situation on the ground. The people are so much concerned, and no one have any idea what's going on in this country. Particularly when we see capital Kabul, people here are concerned. Last night there were a lot of phobias and traumas on the people's mind, and they were feeling like the capital is falling to the Taliban. And there were also reports about a prison riot in Kabul and Policharki prison. And then later, the first vice president of the country told and tweeted that everything is under control. But we saw some videos that some of the prisoners were just on the gate leaving the prison. Yet we have to wait to confirm what really happened at the prison in Kabul. And when we see the trauma regarding to the public in Kabul, I was just arriving this morning, the banks, they are full of people. Millions of dollars have withdrawn from Kabul banks, and still there is no number, long queues in front of every bank in capital Kabul. While I was looking all around, I was just coming through Iran embassy. The road was full of the people who were applying for Irani visa. At the same time, the online visa facility that somehow extended by the Pakistani embassy, whether there are still problems in their prisons, but it's also easy. These 2 countries, the neighboring countries, heavily, strongly involved in Afghanistan scenario, are giving visas to Afghan individuals, but it's not an easy task at the same time. Let me tell you about passport department. More than 90,000 passports are pending, and there are long queues. They are waiting from 5 or 4 of the morning until 6 of the evening.
So, I mean, obviously a lot of people desperate to flee the country, not just with visas or passports, but also just to walk across the border. We're seeing folks trying to flee the fighting internally as well and heading to the capital, Kabul. So give us an idea of just how serious the refugee crisis is in Afghanistan right now.
We got 2 crises now in the country. One, as you said, Jonathan, it's about the refugees. People are trying to flee anyways, in any possible path through anywhere. But all the neighboring countries of Afghanistan have strengthened their borders with Afghanistan, and they're continuing to stop the refugee crisis and avoid it. And at the same time, another crisis is the crisis of displaced people. Kabul is hosting thousands of families, and every minute at least there are 3 families arriving to Kabul from different gates of the capital. So these crises are of much more concern now, and the government in Kabul is losing a lot of controls in management and other stuff, and even the displaced people that are now living in different parts of Kabul city are suffering very hard days and night. They lack food, drink, and even there were something that happened recently. 40 of the women are pregnant, and about 12 of them gave birth to their infants right in the parks, and no one was taking care of them, and that's why they are criticizing the government in Kabul. At the same time, Kabul is also hosting a lot of more and expecting a lot of more displaced people.
Yeah, I mean, just horrifying scenes there across the country there. Let's talk more about Kabul. You mentioned some of the panic there of people really concerned about what the future holds. Explain to us what exactly they're most worried about. And is the city preparing for a massive fight now against the Taliban?
As I said, according to a military plan, Sameh Sadat, who was just fighting for more than 2 weeks in Afghanistan's southern province, Helmand, and he was able to control a very narrow land. He is appointed as chief of Kabul security, and that's what experts say. The government looks like they will fight and resist in Kabul, but still there are diplomatic efforts, as I can clearly tell you. Right now, there are also meetings in different parts of Kabul, particularly in presidential palace, and they're making it happen to finally avoid destruction, offensive, and killing of the people. So if we see all around the country, the scenario is changing. As I earlier told, it's about a surrendering scenario. But the question remains, will the president resign or surrender to all these scenarios? Of course, we are much closer to the change of system. The republic is under question, and there might be a lot of changes. The United States have sent more than 5,000 troops, and they are trying to evacuate their personnel in Kabul and their embassy and other organizations, and at the same time Britons, Canadians, everybody is preparing. But politically, this is the only path that can solve the country's catastrophe that the people, and particularly the residents in Kabul, are much more feared of.
Speaking on the diplomatic front, Qatar, which is hosting Afghan peace talks, is calling on the Taliban to stop fighting. Qatar's foreign minister met with the head of the Taliban's political bureau in Doha on Saturday. Doha has been hosting meetings between the Taliban and the Afghan government for months, but with little progress. The latest meetings took place this week, attended by the two sides and envoys from the U.S., China, Pakistan, the European Union, and the United Nations. The United Nations worries Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian catastrophe. Almost 400,000 civilians have been displaced so far this year, more than half of those just in the past 2 months. 80% are women and children. Afghanistan is on course to see its highest ever number of civilian casualties in a single year. More than 1,000 people have been killed or injured from attacks, especially in Helmand, Kandahar, and Herat provinces. So with thousands fleeing the violence, the UN is calling on Afghanistan's neighbors to keep their borders open.
I think 2 reasons to explain the very little resistance. On the one hand, we know that there were some internal problems of Afghanistan government, for example, internal divisions, corruptions, or internal competitions of the different political powers and political blocs. On the other hand, it is a very feature of Afghanistan history, because if we look at the history, every time that when the transformation or the change of the political structure is always very little military confrontation. I mean, the large scale of military confrontation is always happened under the negotiation table. That the different blocs, they try to exchange their ideas, they try to exchange their interests. So that's why very, very little confrontation erupted, but everything seems like that Afghanistan Taliban is taking on cities rather than capturing cities. Jonathan.
Yeah, good point there. Well, the U.S. president also announced that he's authorized 5,000 troops to help with the evacuations and the drawdown. There have been calls for the Biden administration to provide more support to the Afghan forces defending the capital. Do you think that's likely, and would it really change anything at this point?
Well, I don't think it will happen. I don't think it will actually change anything, because United States decision has already been made that the United States will totally withdraw from Afghanistan, including its military personnel and as well as its citizens and diplomatic staffs. So without the support of the United States, without the support of the United States, this is very difficult for Afghanistan government to resist the attack from Taliban or resist the penetration from Taliban. Especially we have already seen that the Kabul city has been surrounded by Afghan Taliban forces. So I don't think the United States promise will change anything, Jonathan.
You know, the United Nations says that they're worried about a humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. How worried are you about that? What do you think that will look like in the days and months ahead?
I think it will be very likely if without the international support and international assistance, it's very likely that escalated into the very large scales of humanitarian crisis, because a large number of the civilians they are now inside the capital city of Kabul, and the lack of food, the lack of the drinks, just as our colleague from Afghanistan reported. So they need urgent assistance, need urgent materials. Meanwhile, the very urgent establishment or construction of the communication mechanism should be set up in the future between international society and the very local authority in Kabul and the other cities of Afghanistan to help the local people. So the international society should do something, and the local authorities of Afghanistan should do something. Jonathan.
So, Professor, give us an idea of where do you see this going here? Is Afghanistan on the brink of a prolonged, bloody civil war, or do you see this as a complete and sudden Taliban takeover?
I think it's just a sudden Taliban takeover, because even for the United States consideration before they decided to withdraw, I don't think they could expect such sudden transformation of the landscape inside Afghanistan. And if we look at the battleground, there are very few conflicts even occurred even in some cities that should have the very large scale of confrontation, but then nothing happened, but just the seizure of Afghan Taliban into the city. So I think it has the internal problem of Afghanistan government, and also reflect the very features of the Afghan political and social traditions, just as we discussed, John.